China is currently planning active Bitcoin purchases and a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This can be gathered from a CNBC interview. Additionally, there are other sources that confirm this as well. We're now seeing the international Bitcoin space race fully underway. According to CNBC, states in the Middle East are also actively working on strategic Bitcoin reserves. In addition, we see that there are massive money packages in China. There are massive new stimulus packages, and in the past, these stimulus packages have always resulted in a positive Bitcoin price. We look at why, on the one hand, the economy in China is collapsing, why the market here needs to be massively bailed out, but at the same time, China is preparing for Bitcoin. And Donald Trump has already said that we have to be ahead of China here, but could now even be the case that China will overtake the USA here. Because the USA, as we now know, has not declared itself willing to actively buy Bitcoin, to push active Bitcoin purchases a bit further down the line. And China could be doing just that now, getting ahead of the U.S. Donald Trump keeps saying it over and over again. We need to be ahead of China. And now we have Samson Mao, who actually confirms something massive here. He says here that it's likely the US has only about 112,000 Bitcoin and China has 194,000 Bitcoin. There are theories that China sold the Bitcoin, but the official response was that Bitcoin would be transferred to the state treasury. There are only 21 million Bitcoin in total, plan accordingly. And that was the response to Michael Saylor, who said that the US now has the largest strategic reserve, meaning the largest Bitcoin strategic reserve. Samson Mao disputes that and says, hey, it could even be that China now has more Bitcoin than the U.S. On top of that, the US doesn't even know exactly how much Bitcoin they have. That means the US has around 190,000 Bitcoin. Then there are the Bitfinex coins, around 80,000 or so, that you have to subtract. Then you get to the 112,000 that Samson Mao is suggesting here. And then there are the marshals, who apparently aren't really careful in their accounting, bookkeeping, cash register, procedure. And there have been repeated rumors that perhaps the USA has much less Bitcoin than they actually think. And that's why we need to do an audit to see how much Bitcoin is actually out there. And now here comes the kicker. So we already have China potentially holding more Bitcoin than the U.S. The US isn't actively buying Bitcoin, at least for now. That's not in the plans, except maybe with tax-neutral options, which could be possible. Now, I'm talking about evaluating options for how to buy Bitcoin in a tax-neutral way. And now here comes the massive statement on CNBC that will really blow you away. Get ready.
Brian Armstrong last night ahead of this summit today, and he's one of the members who's been advising the Trump transition team since the campaign trail, and he made the point that he thinks a lot of countries are going to follow. I know of already Middle Eastern countries, Gulf states that have been looking into a Bitcoin buying strategy. There's also reportedly conversations within the Chinese government to look to follow suit if the government in the U.S. makes this move to roll out a purchase plan.
But there is no purchase plan.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, if you have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, China used to be one of the epicenters for Bitcoin mining. It's very easy for them. They have all of this hydropower, and so they already have all the facilities, and they banned it a couple of years ago, but it takes nothing to turn it back on. And then, I mean, similar to Iran evading sanctions by just mining Bitcoin, they already have it on hand.
Right, so this is referencing a statement from Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, who was also here at the Crypto Summit. This interview was recorded right before the Crypto Summit, and most people missed what was being said here. And she also confirms here that Brian Armstrong believes that several nations, including Gulf states and China, are planning to accumulate Bitcoin and build up Bitcoin reserves. And that's the kicker, because she also says here, hey, in China, there's still the whole infrastructure. They have all that hydropower. Bitcoin would be banned, but they could turn it back on at any time. And many assume that China has only banned Bitcoin for the public, but secretly, China has continued to mine Bitcoin, because the hash rate in China is still around 10% of the global total. So 10% of the global hash rate is still in China, even though Bitcoin mining is banned here. Many believe that China is still secretly betting on Bitcoin, and the next ones are the Gulf states such as Abu Dhabi, and so on, since we also know that you have Bitcoin in your treasury. And this is a really, really brutal thing that is coming our way now. And like I said, this isn't the only source claiming this right now. We also have David Bailey, who says that there are currently closed-door meetings in China, negotiations behind closed doors that are supposed to lead to a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because China seems to be really triggered by Donald Trump right now. And that's kind of understandable. We're seeing all these trade wars and so on. And here is Bitcoin, the next level where you can then simply, let's say, with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, be very, very smart. You can position yourself. Here's another rumor. China is apparently working on implementing its own strategic Bitcoin reserve. Recently, China sold 194,000 Bitcoin from the Plus token scam. So that's the next source. I can put a link to that down below for you. There is an article linked where it says here that there are currently rumors that China is working on a strategic Bitcoin reserve, then the reasons are also laid out as to why that would make sense. Because if other countries are moving ahead, then you just have to follow suit. And the craziest thing that could happen for Bitcoin would be a nation-state FOMO. I mean, just 2 or 3 years ago, you wouldn't have even been able to imagine that something like this would be debated at all, whether different states would play each other off. It's like this. The first state, Michael Saylor always says this, the first big nation that goes all in on Bitcoin is going to benefit the most. But we have to say that what's happening here in the US isn't quite there yet. The big move that many have been waiting for is that there will be a massive investment in Bitcoin, let's say, by accumulating large amounts of Bitcoin. What Michael Saylor meant here is that the first state that really starts accumulating Bitcoin will benefit massively. And that's the big question now. Is that China? Is it the USA? Are there any Gulf states involved? Or is it someone else? Russia? Feel free to let me know down below what you think about the whole story. By the way, let me know if you'd be down to chill in this hammock here in El Salvador. Check this out. This awesome hammock is set up here now, with this awesome view here. Let's freaking go. Now here comes the next big deal. And that could be even more significant than the whole space race here. And there's actually an article here from Actionar. This has come up time and again that China's economy and so on isn't really booming. And here it actually says that the Chinese government is opening the monetary floodgates. And now we need to pay very close attention because this is super relevant. With a mix of fiscal and monetary measures, Beijing aims to boost consumer sentiment and cushion the effects of the escalating trade war with the USA. A feast for risk-loving investors. In fact, Bitcoin could also benefit from the flood of money. So we see here the economy is not just stagnating in Beijing, but all over China. Now there are all these customs issues, and this really hits China hard. And now we have the response from the Chinese government. And the response from the Chinese government is like with everything, money printer go BRR. That means we now have massive stimulus packages coming our way. And we've seen this before, that these stimulus packages have also massively boosted Bitcoin here in China. It also goes on to say that expansionary monetary policy in major economies has often been accompanied by bullish trends in the crypto markets. In the past, a study by S&P Global shows that both upward and downward trends in cryptocurrencies have been observed during times of ultra-loose monetary policy and strong tightening. And this tightening is definitely coming our way now. And many also expect that this measures package, what's happening here in China, because we see QE happening, we also see that interest rates are being lowered. These measures packages are not just rolling towards us in China, but they're also coming our way in the US and in the Eurozone. And that would be the ultimate disaster for all fiat currencies, but on the flip side, it would be the ultra turbo for Bitcoin. It goes on from here. In response, a spokesperson from the crypto company Nexus is identifying clear patterns here. In the past, around 2015 and 2020, excess liquidity from Chinese stimulus programs often flowed into alternative asset classes. He explained to the block. The current measures could boost the demand for stocks and alternative assets like cryptocurrencies worldwide. But he also warns that China's strict regulatory controls limit direct participation in the crypto market. But state-protected alternatives or classic safe havens like gold could absorb some of that liquidity. So we need to see if this liquidity flows into gold or if it flows into Bitcoin. We also know that in China, I think, there's some kind of limit or something like that. So you can definitely only take out 50,000 euros per year from the country. And I think there are also certain limits when it comes to buying Bitcoin because many people buy, I believe, through Hong Kong. And there were also considerations about whether Hong Kong is now a test pilot and that this test pilot will soon be in China. Bitcoin has now become an asset here in China, but I'm not 100% sure. Write it in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm just not 100% sure. Whether you can really buy unlimited Bitcoin, I know that you are allowed to hold Bitcoin as a means of payment. And so I think there are some restrictions on how much you can hold, but I don't think you can buy Bitcoin without limits. But please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm not sure about that. And the crazy thing is that even Peter Schiff, the biggest Bitcoin critic, has now started his own strategic Bitcoin reserve. He says here, I decided to create my own strategic Bitcoin reserve. I mean, that didn't mean here serious, but interesting animal. Just like the US government, I'm developing a budget-neutral strategy to acquire my Bitcoins without any extra costs. One phase of my strategy involves inviting contributions to my reserve, so he's looking for donations and has shared his Bitcoin address. And it's interesting that Peter Schiff, the Bitcoin critic, is really freaking out because we now see that there is also a Bitcoin reserve. And then a lot of gold bugs and so on are looking at this very critically because it's now really allowed for the US to buy Bitcoin, given that they're selling gold. But there were actually statements from David Sachs who said that this is most likely not planned, at least at this current moment. That's really, really important. In my opinion, it wouldn't make any sense to sell gold here and buy Bitcoin with it. There are definitely a lot worse assets out there. Well, gold isn't a bad asset. There are definitely a lot worse assets you could sell to acquire Bitcoin in a budget-neutral way. There was also a very, very exciting one here, a comment on that regarding the whole China-USA debate. So it's like how this whole thing is going to play out. And it says here from Mike Alfred, this is the calm before the storm. The field is clear. The US is officially in the game. China, Russia, and the Arab states need to respond now. This is geopolitical game theory in action, and they will all be after the same. 21 million Bitcoins are at stake. We're going so much higher. So that's the absolute price driver when states start playing each other off. And there was also the consideration from Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor was also here at the crypto summit with Donald Trump. But that really makes a huge impact. And David Sachs already pointed out that he says they don't want to sell gold. But I mean, David Sachs is just one voice. There are other people who have things to discuss. And Michael Saylor suggested that there should be an attack on the BRICS nations and China by selling off all the gold reserves. By selling all the gold stocks, the value of gold will drop massively. And China, the BRICS nations, and so on, they have gold reserves as the basis for their fiat currencies. If all the gold reserves are sold off here, it could mean that the gold market here is already starting to falter. And then the BRICS nations could also face some really, really big turbulence because the gold prices would drop. Then I'd say the backbone of the fiat currency is at risk here. At the same time, the US is going all in on Bitcoin. They're buying up the entire Bitcoin market. Michael Saylor suggested it again. At the crypto summit, he said that they should buy up to 25% of the Bitcoin network. So he said they should buy several million Bitcoins. He also had a ridiculously high number. I'm not quite sure, were they 79 billions or something like that? And it seems like he has pitched that here too. He also tweeted about it, saying that he thinks it's great to buy so much Bitcoin, but then you have to figure out where to get the money from. And at the same time, Michael Saylor is a fan of selling off the gold. And that would be a certain speculative attack. But as I said, I don't think the idea of selling all the gold is that smart. It would actually be smarter to just find ways to accumulate Bitcoin. I'd say the best move is to buy everything up as quickly as possible, because that's something they just don't get. Michael Saylor says you should accumulate it slowly and transparently. I don't see it that way at all. That is, if you really race in the space here, if there is such a thing as a space race. If you want to be ahead, you have to accumulate as much as possible now, otherwise the Bitcoin price will run away from you. That means, first of all, you're driving the Bitcoin price up yourself. The Bitcoin price just keeps going up, and you can accumulate less and less Bitcoin. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think about this. If you're still looking for a way to build your own stockpile, a personal strategic Bitcoin reserve, then I recommend checking out the links below. 21 Bitcoin. I'll put a link down below where you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin. Here you can use the code BitcoinHotel, up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'm signing off from the Bitcoin Terrace here in El Salvador. Peace out.